Our next speaker is Dr. Greg Govett, and he is speaking on environmental factors and neuroinflammatory illnesses in children.
What I'm doing with this talk is I'm actually trying to inform everybody as to why what is happening might be happening. And there's objective lab metrics to prove it. So without any further ado, let's go. I am certified in environmental medicine. That was done in 2012. I need to establish my credentials in this. I was president of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine in 2016 and 2017. And I was a CME director for the AEM course on mold and mycotoxins in 2017 that we're going to get into here in a minute, and I'm going to explain what some of these things are. I need to explain the pronoun we. We is not the royal we. It means the members of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine who serve on the board of directors. We, those members, come up with actual protocols that we can use to treat environmentally ill patients. And all those protocols are not FDA approved, so we can't talk about them publicly. But nevertheless, we actually have protocols to treat these things that we're going to show you here in a minute. And so when I talk about we, it's the members of the American Academy of Environmental Medicine. Now, when the CDC had credibility in the year 2000, they said that your health is determined by your genetics and your environment. Your genetics are you can't really do a whole lot about it, although there's some things we can do about it. But to be honest with you, your environment is the reason why most of you are here today, and we're going to keep going here. Now, Hippocrates said in 300 BC, roughly, all diseases begin in the gut. And about 25 years ago, the researchers at the medical schools figured out that, yes, autoimmunity begins in the gut. So they finally confirmed it, which is good. At least we're getting somewhere. Let me keep going. Now, this is very important, especially for this organization here. This man is a Venezuelan. I don't think he's alive anymore. He was nominated for the Nobel Prize in Medicine because what he said was that in any neuroinflammatory condition, there's a gut-brain connection confirming gastrointestinal/microbiome pathology with the neurologic pathology. So whenever you've got a problem up here, there's a problem down there. And believe it or not, they're actually teaching that in the medical schools now, so we're on terra firma here. Now, one of the hallmarks of environmental medicine is that children are more susceptible to environmental xenobiotics due to their immature immune, endocrine, microbiome, and neurologic systems. And we're going to go over all those here in a minute. Now, this is a very important thing to understand here. All xenobiotics sequester in the body's tissues. We've known that since the 60s. We're going to prove that here in a minute. Now, also, all xenobiotics distribute unevenly throughout the body. That means you can have environmental injury in one particular area of the body, and the other areas seem to be fine, and the guy in the medical school sitting there scratching their head wondering what the hell's going on with you. Wants to refer you to psychiatry or something else like that. So, next thing we need to talk about are mycotoxins. What are mycotoxins? These are naturally occurring chemicals secreted by fungi or mold that are injurious to organisms upon ingestion, inhalation, or on contact with them. So with all the decaying vegetation around here, the mycotoxins are present. Mold is ubiquitous on the earth. It returns things through the earth through the composting process. Now, mycotoxins compost organic matter to return that organic matter to the earth. So when the mycotoxins get in the human body, they start composting it down. The only problem is everybody's still using their body. Now, Big Pharma likes mycotoxins. You might recognize this drug right here called Cellcept. It is mycophenolic acid. It is a mycotoxin secreted by Penicillium mold, which is the same mold that they get penicillin from. And it is a transplant rejection drug. It is an immunosuppressant. So whenever you're seeing people with recurrent infections, autoimmunity, all these other things, yeah, there we go. There's the mycotoxins. And the Cellcept decreases lymphocyte proliferation, cytokine production, antibody response. Translation, it suppresses your immune system, basically blows it away. So these mycotoxins that I've been talking about very recently here, they get into the body, they suppress the immune system. They're composting things down. Let's keep going. All right. I don't know how well you can see this, but this is an absolutely critical slide, okay? And what it's showing is organochlorine deposition in the body. And what it shows is primarily the organochlorines, this is DDT and its cousins. They primarily, in the center there, they've only got 1% in the blood. And the medical schools used to do a blood test on everything. But the problem is they're missing the boat because this is sequestered primarily in the tissues. And it shows in the adipose tissue right here where the majority of these hydrocarbons are sequestered. Now, it also shows off to the left side of this slide the gray matter and the white matter depositions as well as in the liver. Now, we're going to stop for a minute because I've got to tie everything together. When we talked about how children are more susceptible to environmental injury, look at this slide right here if you can see it and think. That's antithetical to medical practice now, but think. What does an infant look like the minute it's born? Think about that. It's pretty much just kind of a head and this kind of shriveled up little old body underneath it. And you have to understand that the mass of that infant is neurologic tissue. So most of these hydrocarbons that they're circulating around in the mother's bloodstream and the endocrine disrupting chemicals that we're going to go over, they're now in that child's brain. So that's one of the reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing here today, and we're going to keep going. Because this is the most embarrassing slide of the whole lot. I pulled this slide out of the OU Health Science Center library, and as you can see, it was part of the DDT studies of the 60s, and I believe this one was in 1968. So that's a 56-year-old data, and the medical community hadn't quite figured that out yet. They're a little behind the power curve there. So let me keep going on another one here. Cecil's Textbook of Medicine, 23rd edition, sitting on my desk. Let's talk about lead. Absorbed lead likes to sequester in bone. It will stay in your circulation for about 3 weeks, and then it will sequester in the bones. In states of demineralization, such as the postmenopausal state, pregnancy, even fractures, this lead will then be released into the body's bloodstream, and then it will land wherever it lands and wreak havoc. We need to talk about the sites of sequestration now, because I've just established with the DDT studies that these xenobiotics sequester in the tissues. Mycotoxins like fat and neurologic tissue, hydrocarbons like fat and neurologic tissue. So there's two xenobiotics sequestering in infants' brains. Lead likes bones, mercury likes fat and neurologic tissue, cadmium, lung, liver, and kidneys. There are some of us that think that cadmium may be the etiology of lung cancer because 70% of patients with primary lung cancer never smoked. When we move even further, you've got to remember that all of these xenobiotics generate chronic inflammation because they don't belong there. The body's trying to kill them. Okay? That's what your immune system does. Now, here's the pathophysiology of all these xenobiotics. You got to remember you're ingesting these things whenever you're in like a moldy, water-damaged building or you're in any area where there's hydrocarbons in the atmosphere because everybody forgets that they swallow 2 to 3 times a minute, stay on this side of the grass. Inhalation will access the bloodstream. Ingestion leads to the GI inflammation. The GI barrier and the microbiome begin to break down. Various bacterial toxins as part of your microbiome will then get released. Chemicals, foods, cytokines, all these other things can break down the blood-brain barrier as well. They break down the gastrointestinal barrier. Now you've got Fouad-Lachine's gut-brain connection with all the neuroinflammation and the gastrointestinal inflammation as well. Now, when you've got a compromised blood-brain barrier, because these xenobiotics can circulate through there's no placental barrier, so the xenobiotics will circulate into the baby through the mother. Now they can sequester in the neurologic tissue, and the body will respond with inflammation in an attempt to kill the xenobiotics. Now guess what? You can't kill anything that's not alive. So all of these hydrocarbons, mycotoxins, heavy metals, they're inert. You can't kill them. So all they do is just continue to generate inflammation, killing the cells, leading to all these chronic inflammatory problems. Okay, so how do we manage environmentally ill patients? The answer is you got to get all those antibiotics out of the body's tissues. It's that simple. Anything else you do is just masking symptoms. The inflammatory process continues to exist if you don't remove the xenobiotics out of the tissues. That's just the way it is. There's no other ifs, ands, or buts. Now, The good news is that we have some hope with all this stuff. This is a peer-reviewed medical publication I pulled off PubMed, which is the National Medical Library of Congress, describing chemical exposure early in life in the neurodevelopment in children. So guess what? The medical school's finally on the playing field. They haven't quite figured out what to do with it, but that's okay. At least I'm not some quack talking about this stuff anymore. Because you see right here, what they were looking at was mercury, lead, and organophosphate pesticides along with polychlorinated biphenyls. The organophosphates gave ADD-type problems, the PCBs and the mercuries, performance impairments, attention concentration problems. They're at least on these things now, which is good. Now here's another article out of PubMed talking about the developmental exposure to environmental chemicals and metabolic changes in children. Now, you're going, wait a minute, we're in neuroinflammation here. Boys and girls, the same chemicals causing endocrine disruption are the same chemicals that are causing mitochondrial dysfunction and the same chemicals that are all neurotoxins. We've got the guys on the playing field. They don't know what the hell to do with it, but that's okay. We're good things. So, endocrine disrupting chemicals may influence growth patterns during infancy and childhood, and they may also contribute to the development of various metabolic disorders. And they're mainly focusing on the obesity, but we'll get them looking at this neurologic stuff eventually. Now here's another one talking about the negative role of environmental endocrine disruptors in the human neurodevelopment. So we finally have these guys on the playing field down at the medical school. At least they'll open it up right now. Now what I wanted to go to right now are some examples of what I've been talking about here and trying to show you what we have with how this can affect, children. So this first case right here is a 3-year-old boy who grew up in Los Angeles, California. I can't find that article that was going over the endocrine disrupting chemicals in the umbilical cord blood in mothers from Los Angeles. That's where this boy grew up. Fortunately, he hadn't been vaccinated, but he is definitely autistic. He was nonverbal when he came in. He had tics. He was in constant motion, frequent awakenings, eczema. And let's start looking at his environmental xenobiotics. This chart's a little hard to see up here, but basically this little boy had ochratoxin, trichothecenes, and gliotoxin in his system. Forget the names. He's got mycotoxins in his system, and he's only 3 years old. Whenever you see the trichothecenes, that means this little fella got exposed to moldy, water-damaged buildings. That's your fingerprint, because that comes from Stachybotrys, which is not one of the airborne molds blowing around out here today. Now, looky. Here are the hydrocarbon chemicals in this little kid's system. The first one, the MTBE, those are gasoline additives, xylene, that's in various solvents and fluids. And then he's got perchlorate, which is in fuels. And I wanted to show you this right here. That's me, okay? I got 60 years on this kid, okay? That's him, that's me. No wonder he's got problems, okay? And, okay, I've been in kind of a state of chronic I've been on kind of detoxification protocols, which are always a work in progress for about 25 years. But this little fella is way ahead of me in terms of all his toxins. And he's probably got that out of the drinking water. I think that's where that's coming from, because that's when I was in Chickasha, that's where we think we found it coming from. But right here, he's got these organophosphates in his system. He's got the acrolein in his system. And let me go back up here. That's me. Once again, I'm way ahead of him, not only in age, but also in what I don't have in me. And so right here, I need to talk about this with you. This is glyphosate in him. I think glyphosate is the 21st version of DDT, the 21st century version of DDT, because everybody's got this stuff in them now. And it's not because somebody walked up to you and started squirting you with a bottle of Roundup. You ate it. Okay, you ate it in your corn, soy, and canola products. That's what GMO foods mean. They incorporated Roundup, which is glyphosate, into the food, and everybody's been eating it. That's his glyphosate. That's mine. Pretty close. That's all right. But like I said. Now, the next one I want to talk about is another 6-year-old girl who had autistic behavior. She was nonverbal and basically just screamed. Severe allergy complaints. TBI, traumatic brain injury. Whenever she walked, she ran into things and banged her head real good. Poor sleep quality, and she was conceived and born in a home that was moldy. Gluten and dairy were her preferred foods. Her genetics, well, that little girl's genetics is she's one of our registered members of one of the local tribes, and therefore she doesn't detox very well, and that's your genetics. That's a topic for another day. But let me show you what we got on this little girl here. Here are the mycotoxins in her system, 4 of them. Now remember, she's just a 6-year-old little girl. Now guess what? They're my mycotoxins, okay? I checked myself a couple years ago because I started to get some symptoms consistent with mold-related illnesses. So I basically just checked myself, detoxed myself. But once again, here's her, and here's me. Excuse me. Yeah, here's me. So she's way ahead of me, and I'm a lot older than she is. Now, when we also look right here at her microbiome, what we can see right here in this microbiome, I want to call your attention to the arabinose. That's part of that gut-brain connection. I'm just trying to give you just a few examples here. Whenever you see arabinose up, that means she's got a yeast overgrowth in her gut. Okay, that's the metric for that. That's that gut-brain connection with the microbiome. This little girl has an intestinal dysbiosis. With the glycolic and the oxalic acids being up, that confirms that she probably not only has Candida in her system, but she also has Penicillium and Aspergillus in the gut as well. But the real one here, I want to talk about number 24, the succinic acid that's off the scale. That's letting you know she's got major problems with hydrocarbon chemicals in her system. Because whenever that's up, that's what that means. And so we know that this girl not only has mycotoxins, she has hydrocarbons, she has intestinal dysbiosis. She's in a real mess. And of course, she has these other mitochondrial markers down there that are bumped off the wall. That means she's got these xenobiotics are causing mitochondrial dysfunction, so all her organ systems aren't functioning so well either. And let's talk about the 3-year-old boy here. This is the good story here, and I'm going to dovetail some of that stuff here in a minute. This little fella here. Let me give you I don't have any objective metrics to confirm his genetics, but he's got horrible genetics. His maternal grandmother died of a neuroinflammatory condition and didn't even make 60. Okay, so this little fella here had tremors, incoordination, erythema multiforme, just kind of a rash type thing. He was very tall for his age, which indicates that endocrine disruption. You think disruption can mean just cessation. No, it can stimulate it. And that's why you get weird type of endocrinopathies, because there's too much of the endocrine system at work as opposed to too little. He had a speech delay, and he ate a lot of fruit, dairy, and gluten in his diet, and he had that genetic trait, the MTHFR, where he didn't make enough glutathione. That's about all I can talk about with that. But he had gotten vaccinated, and his mom immediately arrested all the vaccinations. And so what we found on this little fella here, let me get back here for a minute. He had this one mycotoxin in his system called ochratoxin, and there was his Roundup, his glyphosate. And then when you can convert him to me, I had a little bit more stuff in him than he did. But here's where he really beat me. He had these gasoline additives, he had the xylene, he had this styrofoam, the styrene in his system. And there's me, and he's got more hydrocarbons in him than me, and I'm way ahead of him in terms of my age. So that's something that we have to look at. And so that was another thing that he had in him right there. A little bit of the 1,3-butadiene propylene oxide, but that's not too bad. And so that was me right there. And so he was a little bit ahead of me. He had more than me. He had a little bit more stuff in him than I had in me, but nevertheless, you'd expect to have more things than me based on being 5.5 decades older than he is. Once again, he had the intestinal dysbiosis with the arabinose being up. The puric acid, that's another one indicating he's got parabens in his system from personal care products. And his hydroxybutyric and his acetic acid were up. Those are indicative of subclinical liver dysfunction. Remember that slide I showed you where a little bit of these hydrocarbons will sequester in the liver? Well, we've already showed you his hydrocarbons. We've already got some subclinical liver dysfunction there. And this right here is his methylation study. That's fine, the 2-hydroxybutyric. I already told you he was MTHFR positive, which means he does not make enough glutathione. This simply is the metric to confirm that. And so this one here shows one of the patients that we had under our treatment protocols. We can't really discuss the protocols because they're not FDA approved. That's kind of the rules, so we got to kind of stay out of trouble. But I just want to let everybody know that this was another patient where we put the patient on the treatment protocols that we have, just as I described earlier in the talk by the AEM Academy. And let me see if I can find my arrow here, which I'm having trouble doing. We got them all out. Okay? This can be done. Yeah, I had a lady that she was in a moldy house in Tulsa, and she got real sick and had to leave, had to move out of Tulsa and moved. I think she's now working in Iowa, and it took us 4 years before we got it all out, but we got it all out. Just a little bit of follow-up here before we go into that. The first little boy, he's starting to become a little bit more verbal. He's still kind of real active. The 6-year-old girl is now, with our protocols, she's now speaking in meaningful speech. You can understand what she's trying to say. She won't shut up, but the parents are still happy about that. And the third little boy has basically been mainstreamed. He's going to school. He's, with all the things we did, it just wasn't our protocols. It was everything else that we had to do to get these kids better. So, there's some success here. It takes a long time. I think the best thing I can say about the sequestration of the xenobiotics is that one of my patients quoted me, the other day, I think these things want to stay in my system. They feel like that's where they want to be. And I go, yeah, it's where they want to be because they've got nutrients. It's warm in there. They get, without getting into too much of the chemistry, they kind of bond into the tissues. So you have to really break the bonds to get them mobilized out. But they can be removed. I've proved that to you, and that's enough. So here's my professional information. I've got a website and an Instagram account that I try to check some once a week. And there we go. That's it. Anything else? Okay. I'll be in my tent if anybody wants to talk. Thank you.